Hello, Repro fam. Welcome back to another episode of the Repro Film Podcast. I'm your host, Asha Dahya, and after taking a short break last month for summer activities, it is great to be back with another fascinating and inspiring interview to share with you. This month in the Repro Periodical, we're featuring a short documentary film called Long Line of Ladies from filmmakers Shaandiin Tome and Rayka Zehtabchi, who also happens to be the first Iranian woman to win an Oscar. No big deal. Rayka is a director working in both documentary and fiction. Her documentaries Period, End of Sentence, and A Woman's Place can be seen on Netflix and Hulu, respectively. Rayka's Oscar-winning documentary Period, End of Sentence is about a group of village women in northern India who start a sanitary pad-making business in an effort to improve feminine hygiene and destigmatize menstruation. Along with the film's release, Rayka helped co-found the non-profit The Pad Project to fight the stigma of menstruation and improve feminine hygiene worldwide. Shaandiin is based in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Her breakout award-winning short film Mud premiered at the Sundance Film Festival in 2018, and she returned to Sundance in 2022 with Long Line of Ladies, where it premiered. The short film also won the Documentary Shorts Jury Award at South by Southwest. Her cross-cultural experiences allow her to collaborate with other trailblazers in capturing untold stories among the indigenous community, both as a director and a cinematographer. Long Line of Ladies follows a girl named Aarti and her family as they prepare for her ihuk, the once dormant coming-of-age ceremony of the Karuk tribe, where they celebrate a young woman getting her period and her symbolic and literal journey into womanhood. This stunning film, which you can watch on our site during the month of August, is a beautiful and powerful counterculture message portraying what it looks like to live in a world where menstruation is not taboo, shamed, or considered dirty in any way. There is no major conflict in this film. It is all about community, family, tradition, and love. Now, I know what you might be thinking, that it is rare to hear or see any narrative about menstruation that doesn't include some sort of taboo or shame. But I think that's what we loved about this film so much. We are so used to seeing the period jokes, the gendered mockery, and in many cases, the dangerous and detrimental impact of shaming someone for having their period and ostracizing them from society. Seeing this indigenous tribe from California come together, not just the women, but also the men, the dads, the brothers, uncles, and male elders, empower the women in their lives in this crucial moment on their life journey is really something to behold. So it was such an honor to be able to interview both Rayka and Shaandiin about this film and their respective work, especially at a time when there are major strikes happening in the film industry and uncertainty is everywhere. In the following interview, it was really cool to hear Rayka's perspective on making two films about menstruation with complete opposite cultural sentiments as the driving force. It was also eye-opening to hear Shaandiin talk about what it meant to be an Indigenous woman filming another Indigenous woman's ihuk ceremony, as she candidly shares how different it was for her growing up because of internalized shame, a universal trait that many of us can relate to. I hope you enjoy both the film and this interview and leave feeling like a new world that holds a default narrative about periods as positive. I hope you enjoy both the film and this interview and leave feeling like a new world that holds a default narrative about periods as positive and affirming is indeed possible. Shaandiin and Rayka, it is so wonderful to be speaking with you both on the Repro Film Podcast. And before we dive into your work, I'd love to know, how did you both meet and what was the catalyst behind making Long Line of Ladies?
I think Rayka can start off because she reached out to me first.
Yeah.
It was a great meeting after that.
I reached out to Shaandiin. I think really early on, we were sort of researching. My partner and I were researching and basically stumbled upon this blog post from Pim Allen about her older daughter Ty's ceremony, ihuk ceremony. I think the first thought was really like, we need an Indigenous filmmaker to like really, lead this and collaborate with. So I found Shaandiin's work through I think it was through Sundance actually that you were like on a Sundance, you were on like a Sundance blog or article or something, and found her work, and I don't know, just felt really drawn to it. I loved I could feel her voice very clearly in her work, and basically just like reached out, and we ended up having like a very long conversation over Zoom, and I think connected a lot on a lot of things, and kind of like what our wants and desires were for a project of this scale, and just loved her perspective, and that's kind of where it began.
Shaandiin, let me hear your side of the story.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it was a similar thing. Rayka reached out, and I think, I mean, it's already inspiring, like when you see other women in film. I think like for Rayka, she's so acclaimed, and there's so many things that she does to like uphold and stay strong behind her voice, and I think that's something that I really aspire towards. And so I could see that like within our first meeting, like she's very excited about the project, and yeah, I mean, it's always great to like work with people that inspire you and motivate you to try to do something that like maybe you're not entirely sure about. And so yeah, I think we had that first long conversation and kind of like saw eye to eye on a lot of things, and also had our own perspectives. And I felt like
which feels like a big deal, because for people who aren't in the filmmaking world, to find a collaborative partner where you value each other's perspectives, because it's so vulnerable and you have to be open to so many different ideas. I mean, that's such a big deal. So to find someone who you want to work with is huge, right? I would say.
Totally. It was really vulnerable. And I think the other thing, like Shaandiin, just, made several points about like, like sort of seeing eye to eye, but also having your own perspective. And I think the other thing that really was very beautiful and very, very difficult about our collaboration was our strong-headedness, both of our individual strong-headedness and like willingness to go there and challenge one another, even though it was difficult and uncomfortable at times. But I think what ended up happening every single time was there was sort of like this like willingness to listen and grow, even if there was a little bit of pushback maybe or defensiveness from the beginning. I think on both sides there was always this willingness to like ruminate on what we talked about and grow, and like, okay, so this makes me uncomfortable, but how can I step out of my own brain and like challenge myself here and do it together? And I think that actually really for me personally like led to a very nourishing experience. I think sometimes we sort of seek out situations that bring us comfort and don't challenge us, because we just want to sort of quiet that anxiety. But the best ways that you can grow as a person, as a storyteller and a creator, is to put yourself in those situations where you really are being challenged constantly. And if you can get to the other side, really beautiful things can happen. And I think we all kind of experienced that.
And what resulted was just so phenomenal. I mean, Long Light of Ladies is such a welcome dose of empowerment, cultural enrichment, and really subverts the numerous harmful message we're accustomed to seeing around periods and menstruation. Can you talk about the decision to highlight the ihuk ceremony following Artie's journey to becoming a woman?
I guess we both came into it with like different reasonings, and Rayka will explain her reasoning after. But I think for myself, like one of the first things that we talked about was like, how are we gonna like cover this ceremony? Like, how are we gonna like understand like what it means to go through something as like a young woman that feels like empowered by her community? And I think one of the first things I thought of was like when I was younger, I'm Dene, and we have a similar ceremony called the Kinalta, like where you get your first period and you have a ceremony. And I didn't have mine because I was scared, and I like really like regret that time in my life, like of like feeling scared about, I guess, like what it meant to have a ceremony, not being in touch with like who I was, feeling like you were distant even though like you were native. Like I guess like my family grew up in like my parents moved away from the reservation and like raised my brothers and I in a very urban setting. And so I feel like there's a lot of disconnect there and a lot of self-hatred or like self-doubt. And so I feel like one of the first things that like we talked about was just like how like cool it is that Ati and the Allen family just have like this empowered view of like what it means to go through something in a time of your life that can be like very difficult regardless. And so I think the decision was like made mostly just because the family was already so positive and so welcoming in general. And I think it was just meaningful to be a part of that experience and to be a part of something that I think like looking back, you could feel the importance of like what it means for like other young Native women or other like young women in general to see something that's like really positive and exciting about a time in their lives that can be like really hard.
That's really beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. Was there any sort of catharsis filming this story and journey, knowing what you'd been through and decided to not do?
Yeah, I think every day, like, I mean, even just like on our Zoom talks before and like getting to know the Allen family, like it just felt like what you wish you would have had, but like also I do have a loving family and I do have a caring family. It's just that we don't happen to like practice traditional things. And so I think it was very helpful. Like even like my grandma, like I talked to her after she watched the movie and she's like, I'm really sad we didn't get to like have your ceremony, but I'm happy like that you've found like other ways to like explore that and like find meaning in like these things that are really important to you. And so it's very cathartic, very empowering for me and like all those other people that are around me, like my nieces. And yeah, it's been really awesome.
Rayka, what did it mean to you?
Well, I mean, I entered it through a different lens. Because obviously I'm not Native and I came from it from a different perspective, not necessarily even understanding the Native perspective right from the beginning. For me, it's like I kind of, my first project that I did, my first documentary that I did was called Period End of Sentence, and this was years ago. And I was looking back now, I feel like I was a baby when making that film, just in a totally different headspace and so much younger and kind of just throwing myself into the experience. But that film opened my eyes up to a lot of issues, that women deal with all over the world, just stepping outside of my own bubble and the world that I knew. And that film specifically was about a group of women in northern India that start a business making sanitary pads as a way to eradicate the taboo around menstruation and also spread awareness about the importance of feminine hygiene in their community. And just seeing like the massive impact that film had, it was like just blew my mind. I was like, wow, this is like, we have a responsibility as storytellers because we are capable of making such an impact with the stories that we tell. Coming away from that project with the PAD project, which was the organization that was behind Period End of Sentence, I think we were kind of thinking about like stories like how we could not just reveal the shame around menstruation, but like what is the other side of that look, in our like ideal world, how do we as a society treat that topic, right? Treat menstruation, not just menstruation, but like coming of age as a young woman. How do we handle that? And how can we highlight, or find and highlight communities that do sort of handle it in the ideal way that we would hope. And then just kind of kept coming back to different indigenous cultures and communities and how so many different tribes do celebrate menstruation or have coming of age ceremonies, not just for young women, but also for young men. And just continuously feeling drawn to that, and then came across Pim's post about the Ihuk ceremony and connected with her. And I think there was always this like I think there's this realization afterwards that like as a filmmaker, as a documentarian too, like there's plenty of stories that we want to tell. Um, but it doesn't mean that you always can tell the stories that you're drawn to. You know, it's not just a matter of access, but also like, is it the time? You know, the subjects, the communities that you're approaching, do they want that? You know, are they seeking that? Because it's them, it's their lives that are going to be on the line, you know.
Yeah.
And so, you know, it was a back and forth, a long process, communicating with Pim and her family, and Pim communicating with her community, and us communicating with her community, and sort of building that trust. It took a lot of time. It took a lot of communication, a lot of hard work, and a lot of vulnerability on both sides. But I think what we collectively arrived at was that Pim and her family and her community were ready to share. It was just critical that it was really their voice, and that they were, you know, that we were sort of facilitating that, making it happen through, you know, our technical skills and storytelling abilities, but that, you know, it was going to be an incredibly collaborative process, and that it's precious, you know. If the story is going to be told, it's absolutely, if the story is going to be told, it's absolutely got to be precious and handled with the utmost care.
And I love what you said about seeing the other perspective of periods and menstruation. Like for so many people, myself included, there never was another perspective, the positive and celebrated perspective. So even that alone is phenomenal, and a really important aspect of what you both have done with this film. Something else that struck me while watching this was how the ceremony is such an intergenerational experience. The way men and young men and boys play an important role in the ceremony. Can you both talk about highlighting Artie's dad and some of the elder men who also share their emotional recollections about the women in their families? It was just so beautiful to see. So countercultural as well.
It's such an exciting process to be a part of, and really, I don't know, you kind of see things unfold and realize kind of like how necessary and how crucial it is that men be a part of things like this, and that's like where a lot of change maybe doesn't like start, but like it involves them. And I think they are very crucial and like aware of like what's happening, and they're open, and like their communication is there between like what is happening with Ati, and like how that gives her like agency to like talk about like her own body and like how she's feeling. And I think that kind of stuff is like so important for men to realize, and I think like reciprocate by women. And I think it gives women a lot of agency like within their own lives, and it makes them feel empowered. And I think like the overall feeling of like being there and like hearing these kind of things like kind of made us like turn our heads, just because we were like, oh my gosh, like we haven't, like at least me growing up, like my dad wasn't very understanding of like what it means for me to get my period. He didn't ever like ask me like anything about it, and so it was like a very disconnected thing that like I just talked with my mom about. Like my brothers weren't involved in it at all, and so it was a very healing thing to see that like they could be like active participants in like something that you would think is like a very individual thing, but like it's important not just like for your menstruation, but it's like important for like how you feel as a woman, like what your role in society is, like how you feel upheld by like community members in a way that isn't just like I guess like who holds, I guess like a position of like power. It like feels very even. And I mean, it's something that like we talked a lot about when we were like making it. It's just like there's so many things that this doc could be about, but I think like one of the really important things is like all these like men are here like helping out, and we have to like it wasn't that we like focused on it, it's just that like it unfolded in front of us and we're like, oh my god, this is beautiful.
Yeah, I don't think we were ever like, oh, let's highlight the men, because there's like everyone's just there. Like everyone just has a like men, women, but also like just all different generations. Everyone has a role. a role to play, and it's something that like has been with them as a community, as a family since like day one. So they've sort of been around that, exposed to that, and like understanding that like eventually their time will come that they will have to play this role in Ati's ceremony. And so there's nothing like, there's no necessarily highlighting that on our part. It just is how it is, and it's beautiful.
Yeah, it really is. It was so wonderful to see. I'm like, more of this, please, everywhere. And on that note, how can film and entertainment play a vital role in changing cultural narratives or amplify narratives that are out there around something that has been so infused with shame and stigma? I mean, people have been making jokes about it. We see these images of Tiger Woods handing a tampon to another golf player as a joke. I mean, the idea of it being so taboo is so universal. So how can we utilize films like Long Line of Ladies to make it universally celebrated and respected?
I think something that we're really proud of about this film is that it was about celebration and that there wasn't a lot of conflict in it. And it felt as though it existed in a world that like was celebratory and is celebratory. And I think that's like, for me, at least, part of the reason why people respond to it so much. And I think it's not often that you see a film that is like about a young girl who just started menstruating that gets celebrated. And I think they're like, the stigma is there for me because it's like there is so many conflicted stories about that narrative. And so like it was really important for us to like I guess like see what was in front of us, which was like the Allen family and like their community, and make sure that that celebration translated to like our film and like was full of like Ati feeling empowered and excited. And although she was like maybe a little bit nervous about her ceremony, there was still something that she felt was like very important. Like she saw a role for herself like within her community. And I think like that for me like helps with shame and stigma, because it's like, oh, like we are no longer we're seeing like a world and a perspective that is so filled with celebration that like we can't like stigmatize or shame it. And so it's like kind of counteracting in a way that's just like we're not that we're like tired of these like conflicted stories, but like we're excited to share things where people can see the potential of what it is if it were just a story that were celebratory.
Totally agree. And that's the thing too, is like when you look at documentary, we talked about this a lot, like sort of call to action documentaries especially, it's like they're filled with conflict, and it's almost like they can't exist without conflict, right? And or at least maybe that's just historically what we've seen. I think that's really what makes this film, one of the many things that makes this film so special, is to not have that conflict and to still be very emotionally invested when you watch the film. I mean, like we've seen reactions from audience members, whether they're native or they're not native, or whether they're invested in this topic or they're not. People from all different walks of life who have had really intense emotional reactions, and it's because of love. Like it's like a hug. Like that's what it feels like, right? To express love towards someone. It can elicit that sort of reaction. And I think with storytelling, it's like exposure is what can really sort of help change narratives in society, is exposing people to new ways of thinking, new perspectives, new topics. That really, really does have a very big impact in how someone can view the world. I was going to give an example, just like, because I reflect on this a lot personally. One of my favorite things about making documentaries is the immense privilege that we have as storytellers to be able to meet people and communities that we're not familiar with, as outsiders, to to have the ability to be able to get to know these communities and these different ways of life, and build these bonds and connections with people that really are like long lasting, because I think it does a lot to sort of challenge your worldview and your perspective. And I feel like every experience that I've had in documentary filmmaking, I come away from it feeling challenged, exhausted, depleted, and ultimately like spiritually nourished, more nourished because of it. You know, coming away just like having this like totally new perspective and being like, oh wow, so I see where our similarities are, I see where our differences are, and that's okay, and that's beautiful. You know, and I think when you watch documentaries or you watch stories unfold, when you consume those stories, it can definitely have the same type of impact on people.
Yeah, I love that you described it as a big hug, and seeing the trees and the cinematography and the landscape, it just feels like so warm and beautiful. So yeah, it's a beautiful way of describing it. I know you touched on this a little bit in the way that you communicated with the Allen family, and but can you tell me about the filming process, any challenges you came up against, and how you prioritize cultural sensitivity throughout the shoots?
I think Rayka and I are both very similar in like the way that you have a project and that you value like the people that are in it, you value like the time that you're giving into it. Like with that, there's also like innovation within film, and like how can you create change with something that can be like very boilerplate. Like there's so many documentaries out there that exist about like Native people or just like really anything, but like how can you like create change for not just like what the end product is, but also like for like how you go about the process. And I think for myself, like working in mostly like Native indigenous film, like there's a lot of problems within like how people go about things. And I think it can be like very hard, not just for I guess like seeing how the process is, but it can be very hard for creativity. Like it can be tough to try to like stick yourself out there and stand for what's right, and also like save energy to be creative at the same time. And so I think part of the process for us was like, how do we make sure that this doc is like also I guess like doing what it's saying that it's doing, which is like being like a positive message for I guess like an audience that might be non-native, about Native people, like upholding Native people to a standard that like feels very much like what they do, and like how can we like make sure that that process is like invigorated with that. And so like part of that was like giving agency to to Pim. She's like a producer on the project, but I think it was just like a lot of talking, like how do we like maybe avoid like tropes or like stereotypes, like even though this is a documentary and we are like filming things that are going to happen in front of us, how can we like make sure that like we're challenging ourselves to say something different. I think like not shooting the ceremony was part of it, like really making sure that like we were like in everything that we were doing, it was like how do we be intentional and like respectful, like whether that was with the cinematography or like the soundtrack or like kind of like shooting on film and not filming all the time. Like how do we make sure that our intention is there and our intention is good, and that we feel every part of this process and that we're aware of everything that we're doing, because we want to make sure that we're there as listeners and not like as extractors. And I mean, there's like so many things that could be culturally sensitive about this, and like things that did come up like that, like we got to the point of trust where it's like, no, we can't shoot that because that's like something that we don't allow to be filmed. Or I mean, it came a part of the process, or is just like, oh, we respect that, and like we don't need that, like we don't have to have that in the documentary. And we like guided our whole entire process and editing around that too. Like everything about it was just like intention, and yeah, a lot of checking in.
For me personally, like it took a lot of I think tuning into Shaandiin's frequency and Pim and her community's frequency, and undoing a lot of the things that I had personally like learned from other documentary filmmakers, and like, you know, just other sort of, like Shaandiin said, boilerplate, situations that I was in. You learn from those experiences, and then you come into this experience and you go, whoa, like I have a totally new level of awareness of, like, little things or ways of maybe like directing or storytelling that I didn't even realize, like, maybe like I should question the way that we go about these things in the filmmaking process. Like, maybe that's not the right way. Maybe there is a better way forward, and constantly having that sort of tension and being challenged was really, really amazing. And I think just led us down this path of complete and utter trust, where we all, by the end of it, had such a clear understanding of what our role was in the making of this film. And it was really this like unified understanding that, like, we are like supporting the family's vision. So by the time we had our first cut, there were really no surprises. I mean, we were so nervous, like sending it to Pim and her family, but like the reaction that we got from them was just like absolutely amazing. And I think made us realize like how far we had all come together as a team, where they were like not surprised at all with anything that was in the film, because all of that sort of heavy lifting and communication was done beforehand. All of this like approval and like how things are going to be captured and what can be captured and what can't, and why, most importantly, why. Like we understood that by the end. And and that really was like very transformative for me personally, because I think I like I've brought that in other projects that I and the other projects that I look to work on in the future. It makes me want to advocate for a different type of filmmaking, because I think like what we learned from this experience made us realize like we do have a lot of power as filmmakers. We do. And I think a lot of people are realizing this now too, with the strikes that are going on. People are unifying and realizing that, like, no, we don't have to accept what is the norm. We don't have to keep doing that. We do have a voice. We do have the ability to challenge what has always been the norm, and question it, and question everything, and say, is this something that we're comfortable with? Is this something that our film subjects are comfortable with? So, I think that's been really, really eye-opening and cool.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, talk about questioning the norm and trying to see a different perspective. Rayka, you mentioned period, end of sentence, which for those who have been living under a rock or may not know, it won an Oscar. I mean, the fact that a documentary about periods won an Oscar is such a monumental sentence, and I love saying that. But it showcases a different cultural perspective to menstruation, specifically in India. So what was it like for you going from that project? I know it wasn't direct, but working on that project and then working on Long Line of Ladies, which specifically amplifies the perspective of the Karuk tribe toward periods, which was very different. What was it like, holding those two different perspectives in balance?
Oh, there's two things. I mean, there's obviously the what each sort of like story taught me, right? Once they both came out into the world. I was a lot younger when I made Period End of Sentence. I just graduated from college and was very sheltered and, not really exposed to a lot of these world issues. So I think like for me, it was surprising because I'd never thought about menstruation in any other context other than my own personal life. I hadn't. And I grew up in a little bit of a bubble with a family that was Iranian and comfortable. We talk about a lot of things openly, and my dad was fine with it. Maybe we're never really conservative family or traditional family, so we're just kind of comfortable. But I think going into Period End of Sentence, I was absolutely shell shocked. I was like, it again, and I keep going back to this, brought this level of awareness where I was like, once you learn and you become exposed to these things, there's no going back. You can't avoid, you have to confront, and realizing that like all over the world, this is happening, not just in India, not just in developing countries, but every country in some way is dealing with these sort of crippling, when the women are dealing with the crippling effects of having so much stigma around these topics that affect us. And then with Long Line of Ladies, it was sort of the opposite of that. It was like selfishly stepping into my own power as a woman and as a filmmaker and saying, oh, wow, we do have the ability to get rid of this shame and stigma. We do have power over that in our own way. Like, we can look to our own communities, we can look to our own families, our own friendships, intimate conversations, and reframe what we've known, what we've learned from society about our bodies and menstruation and how we should be. We can reframe all of that. So that was really cool. And then as far as like, when you look at sort of like the documentary filmmaking aspect of it, the two differences were Period End of Sentence was traditional verite documentary, in that it's like capture everything, record everything. And it comes from, maybe what I observed from journalism. It's just like capture, just never stop recording. With Long Line of Ladies, and Shaandiin was like such a big reason for this, was no, we don't get to capture everything. And there's a beauty in not capturing everything. There's a beauty in thoughtfulness and being selective, and about what you get to see, about what you get to share with audiences. So that for me was like, whoa, that's so cool. That's such a cool way of looking at storytelling.
Yeah, it's so fascinating. Something that I haven't really come across in a lot of the interviews that I've done. Such a refreshing way of looking at, like, you don't have to capture everything to get such a powerful message or beautiful story. There is such a strong sense of community and support, not only what we see with Artie and her family and aunties, etc., but the messages around Ihuk and what it means to the Karuk tribe. Can you both talk about the importance of showcasing community, family, and tradition in this film, and those overarching themes?
I think for me, it's all a part of the experience of being Native or Indigenous. I feel like obviously these experiences can be very specific tribally. Like, from tribe to tribe, everything is different. But I think what we have within this realm of like after colonization and like kind of like being being a part of like the short end of the stick. That's not turning on. I guess like kind of experiencing a lot of trauma through like assimilation, or even like massacres, or like the gold rush that happened in the Karuk community. Like, there's so many experiences that have brought us down. And I think like what Indigenous people have done everywhere is like find the need to adapt. And so I feel like with that adaptation, like the things that you do have with you at all times are like your family. They are your community. It's the traditions that you uphold, and nobody can take those things away from you. And so like, even though like the Ihuk ceremony lay dormant for a long time, they still protected it and like advocated for it later on, and they still felt the need that it was going to like come back later. And I think I guess like when you look at indigenous tribes everywhere, there's lots of themes like that like feel very important to I guess like kind of what the indigenous experience is, and like how people can see that. And so I think like with specificity, there's like a lot of importance, but also like with I guess just love and like attuning to, I guess, like what you see in front of you, like it's important to show that like community, family, and tradition like bring everybody together.
Yeah, the community aspect is so inherent and so unbelievably powerful. And I think that's what I hope people can take away from it. You know, when people watch the film, that they can come away and feel like, what's my community like? You know, do I have a community? Am I part of one? Should I build a community? You know, should I contribute more to my community? Because it's just like getting to know Pim and her community, you realize like there's such a sort of selflessness to how each and every one of them operate. It's so much this idea of like, how can we grow together? How can we support one another? And it's very different from the sort of life experience that I've had or I've observed around me. And I think it's quite rare to see that. And when you do see that, I think it can be really powerful and very it could force you to sort of look inward.
That's a really great point. Well, let's talk about representation on film for a moment. Shaandiin, your experience with the Sundance Fellowship and your drive to uplift Indigenous voices, and Rayka, your passion for showing narratives about Iranian women that often aren't shown in mainstream media. Can you tell us from your perspectives why representation matters and how it's mattered in your careers and lives?
To me, representation is everything. I mean, all of my life, I've kind of been stuck in this really tough place of like, how do I make films that are meaningful to me? Like, how can I have a career that's meaningful to me? Just because of like what I've been given. And I feel like it has been a tough job, like advocating for myself and like kind of what it means to have representation that is meaningful and intentional and loving and representative of like how I feel as an Indigenous woman. And so I think for me, it's been a really hard journey. And I think with that becomes, I guess, like you either succumb to these like pressures that can be like very difficult, or you kind of fight them and you like build a strength around it. And like, how can you make things different, especially like when you have the power that you do as a filmmaker? I mean, like, I think for myself, like none of my family are artists. Like all of my family has been through a lot generationally, and just like looking back, there's been like so many hard times amongst like how we've even just had to survive. And so I feel like the fact that I get to sit around and direct films and call myself a filmmaker and do something creative, I feel like there's a responsibility around that. And like, I mean, it's hard because like sometimes you have the pressure of like, as an artist, I have to say something and I have to advocate for my community all the time, and that can be a huge weight. But I think for me, it's like really important to like carry that responsibility and do it creatively. And like, how can you like challenge yourself and like bring love to like yourself and like the generations of the past that like have been able to do something like this?
Yeah, absolutely.
I couldn't agree more. You know, even though I've had a totally different life experience from Shaandiin, we're both women and filmmakers, and we're like the same age, and, you know, probably have been through some similar experiences on sets and making projects. And yeah, it can be very lonely sometimes. But I think like that's where representation really matters, is like, you know, also sharing the knowledge that you learn throughout your experiences with other people, and saying, like how can we sort of pass the baton and like really support one another. And I want to talk about this because there is a big push for representation in our industry, but it's not always in the right ways. I think there's a lot of performative representation in our industry. It's a lot of checking boxes and sort of not challenging the ways that we go about making these projects, but saying, oh, we need this type of, we need an Iranian woman at the helm because it's an Iranian story. Check, go do your thing and we'll support you. But a lot of times that support doesn't come. And that feeling of agency, being that woman at the helm of the project, doesn't come because you feel all these energies that are like clawing to get to the front and kind of struggling to let go of that charge and that control. And I think it's wonderful that we are having this movement for representation in the industry, but we also need to be more critical of this movement. We need to hold ourselves to a higher standard and ensure that it really is being enforced in a proper way, and that representation is not just checking a box, but it's actually meaningfully giving a seat at the table to the people that should be telling these stories, and not just giving a seat at the table, but like providing support, providing, as a woman too, I think like I've been so fortunate to have so many interesting and challenging experiences where I've stepped back and I've observed and questioned things about myself and the way that things work, and try my best to kind of take lessons away from every experience that I have. And one of the greatest joys for me in being in this industry, and one of the things that combats the loneliness of being a diverse filmmaker, or just a filmmaker in general, because it could be a very lonely process. But like one of the things that combats that is taking that knowledge that I've learned and sharing that with other people, other filmmakers, in a way that really says like, hey, don't do this. What I just did and what I just experienced, don't get into that. Don't do this, like keep an eye out for this, and, hold yourself to a different standard. And, I think that's a really special thing to be able to sort of pass off to other people. So, representation comes with responsibility. And I think it's really important for everyone to realize that, not just, the people who need it the most.
It's so powerful. And speaking of responsibility, I mean, I have on my notes here switching gears a little, but it's not really. It's kind of, we're talking about the industry. Everyone's familiar with the writer's strike and the actor strike happening right now in Hollywood, and the push for better protections for people and residuals and payment and support for people who work in the industry. As filmmakers, how are you both feeling? How are you affected, if at all? And what are you hoping will change?
I'm very happy that the strikes are happening. I think it's unfortunate that they have to happen. I think like it's unfortunate that there is a lot of greed within the film industry that has like created this really tough way to exist as like a filmmaker or an actor, or like really all of these other things that are so crucial to film and like the creative journey, and like how important those roles are and how much people give to them. And I think like I know people, like my friends are like in, I guess like the local union. I have people that I know within the cinematographers union, like my partners in SAG, like know tons of friends in the WGA. And like, I feel like the consensus among all of us, like when we get together and when we're able to like share with each other, is just like how hard it is to exist and be creative, and like how much is asked of you, and like how much of your time is given to the active film just because it can be seen as something that is like entertaining and glorious, and like kind of all these things that like gets to take advantage of someone's life. And I think I think like the pandemic was an important part of like that understanding of like I know I loved living. Like I loved like being able to like make meals with like my partner and like be with my family and do all these other things that I kind of forgot about just because of how much I would work and like work to the point of like feeling like if I didn't work, then I wouldn't ever get a job again. And so I feel like the film industry preys on that kind of stuff. And I feel like it's unfortunate. And I'm just like so happy for everybody that is like striking and for everybody that's wanting to do something right by film and really change the way that we make films and we create films. Because I mean, it's important. Like we're talking about like changing a film through like intentionality and like that sort of thing, but it was because we were given the time and like had this like really beautiful collaboration amongst us. But like there's so many times where this situation, like where we were filming this film, could have gone wrong just because of like the amount of greed that could have been there. Like this whole story could have been like squashed because like somebody's like, well, we don't believe in intentionality. We just like want you to film everything. And so it's like important to find those collaborations. But I think overall it's just important to like value people and like make sure that artists feel valued as artists, because like we already don't really see that in society. And like art is so important to people to like create representation or create an understanding or a perspective. And I think there's so many things that art gives that aren't being reciprocated through the film industry as it stands now.
Yeah, it's just so unsustainable. Rayka, tell me how it's affecting you. What are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, it hasn't affected me personally yet, but I recognize that it will eventually affect me. And I think we're at an inflection point. Like people don't want to be striking, people need to feed their families. But it just comes to a point where like, you realize that your value and your self-worth and self-respect is more important than, the climbing or continuing to sort of put up with the way that things are. And I think we're at an inflection point. It's like I don't see, unless some change occurs, I don't see a way forward. Like I don't see this working anymore. Because like creators are the heartbeat of this industry. And if they're not satisfied, if we're not satisfied and we don't feel valued, then there's no way forward.
It just feels like the industry is never going to be the same. And even when the strikes eventually end, it's not as if, all right, let's go back to the way things were. I mean, so much has to change, but it's really sad to see where it is now. So we will definitely keep tabs on it, and, best of luck to you both. And hopefully you're able to, continue the work that you're doing. So speaking of which, what are you both working on now or next that you're able to share? And where can we follow, subscribe, and stalk your work online or elsewhere?
Right now I'm shooting a lot of friends' films, so that's been a lot of fun and really nourishing and exciting to remember that like I get to make films with my peers and have a good time doing it. I'm also like trying to work on my own personal stuff too, and I feel like more than anything it's like because my partner is also on strike, it's like how do we like make most of a time that like we might not get together in the future. And so I think it's been a good time, it's been a hard time. I think creatively it's been nourishing. I think I'm excited about the future for the most part. And I don't know where you can, I guess I'm on Instagram but not really on it all the time. And I'm trying to think of what else. Yeah, I guess there's my website. But...
We'll share links to your Instagram
okay.
and website for people to check out more. Rayka, where can we find you? What are you working on?
I'm working on a very exciting project, something that I've never done before, and just excited for that to come to fruition. It's a long game. It's going to be a while, knock on wood. But I think another side to this question, which like, I'm just realizing this now because we get asked this all the time, right? In most interviews that we do is like, what's next? What are you working on? And I remember it would just like fill me with the utmost anxiety whenever I'd have to answer that question. It's like, yeah, because it's like, what do you say? Like, can I share what I'm working on? Should I not share what I'm working on? Like, if I'm undecided about what I'm working on, it's like, oh no, I have to tell people I'm working on something,
not.
No, but I think the thing that I really am working on that is the most exciting to me is my own personal life outside of film. I think I have grown up a lot, especially after the experience of making Long Line of Ladies, and realize like what the things are in my life that I really want to prioritize and that I haven't given enough attention and love and care to. And one of the main things is building community. And I think I really came away from that experience feeling like, I felt like kind of lonely for most of my life and most of my career, especially, and asking myself why. And realizing that there has been a lack of community, not because I don't have the most wonderful people around me, but because I haven't tuned in. And so that's what I've really been working on a lot in my personal life, is like reconnecting with that community, nourishing relationships old and new. And I've gained a lot of sort of fulfillment out of that. And I think there's been a lot of personal development on that front, which, will always help your storytelling.
I love that honest answer. I think it's so valuable and very insightful to me personally. So thank you both for sharing where you're at.
There's also one thing that's exciting for Long Line of Ladies. The cinematography was nominated for an Emmy. So Sam Davis, our cinematographer, did such a beautiful job. And so we're excited about that for sure.
That's in September, right? Is it September? I think September.
Yeah.
September.
That's incredible. Well, we'll definitely be sharing updates and keeping everything crossed for Sam. That's wonderful. And it has been such a privilege and honor to have an hour of your time today. So Rayka and Shaandiin, thank you so much. I'm so thrilled that everyone gets to watch Long Line of Ladies this month on the Repro Film Periodical. Thank you both, and best of luck in everything that you're doing in life and in work and in community. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
Asha, thanks for the thoughtful questions.
If you are someone who understands what it is like to live with shame and taboo around menstruation, I highly recommend you watch Long Line of Ladies, featured in this month's Repro Periodical, by heading to reprofilm.org and sit with the beauty and power of its message. Additionally, I hope you will share this episode with a friend and help us spread the Repro Film message and mission. The Repro Film Podcast is executive produced by Mama Film, hosted and produced by me, Asha Dahya, edited by Kylie Brown, with original music by Paris Jane and Maurice Anthony. The Periodical is programmed by Neha Aziz and written by Emily Christensen. Alex Scambardi is our social media manager, and Rebecca Sosa is our distribution and impact strategist. You can find us on social media at ReproFilm on Instagram and at ReproFilmFest on Twitter. Bye for now.